in public.
Okay, so we're in public. Just moving to item number 4, draft minutes. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings at page 201 to 207 of the meeting pack? Are members content that the draft minutes of the meeting on the 10th of October are a true reflection of proceedings? Yep. Okay. And then we also had we had a meeting on the 21st of October, so can I refer members to the draft minutes of the proceeding of that meeting on page 208 to 210 in the meeting pack? Are members content that those minutes for 21st of October are a true reflection of proceedings? Okay. So, matters arising. Can I refer members to pages 211 to 215 of our meeting pack for correspondence from Chair of the Committee on Procedures regarding the Committee's request for provision to be made in standing orders for substitute members and proxy voting. So correspondence details the approach the Committee on Procedures has adopted regarding the provision of substitute members, and it hopes to bring a standing order to the Assembly before Christmas recess. You should note that the Committee has agreed not to restrict the use of substitute members to Assembly recess periods. It has also agreed not to include provision for proxy voting. So members recall that this committee has commissioned its own legal advice on the provision of proxy voting, and that legal advice is expected to be received by us at the start of November. So in due course, the Secretariat team will bring operating procedures for substitute members to the committee for consideration. Everybody content?
Chair?
Yes, Jonathan?
Yeah, Chair, no, I've read this with interest. I still don't fully understand why proxy is not a consideration by the Procedures Committee. To me, proxy voting arrangements make even more sense than substitutes, given that the length of detail that this committee goes into and how hard that and difficult that would be for somebody to essentially be substituted in and substituted out. So I would put on record my concern that seems to be a non-runner with the Committee for Procedures.
Well,
I don't understand why.
They did get their legal advice on that, which they can't provide to us, which is why we in fact have now decided to seek our own legal advice. So that could clarify that very issue, Jonathan. So if you're happy enough to wait till we get our legal advice and we can discuss it more.
They have undertaken to review it if it needs to be as well.
Okay. So just moving on then to item number 6, which is the proposal for a regulation on classification, labelling and packaging of substances and mixtures. And we're going to now hear departmental oral evidence. Can I just let everybody know that this item is going to be recorded by Hansard? So, just to let everybody know, submissions have been received from the Department for the Economy, Department for Health and Department of Justice in relation to this particular proposed EU Act, and these can be found at pages 155 to 185 of our meeting pack. And can I welcome Mark McGregor, Head of Legislation, Goods, Regulation and Chemicals Branch from the Department for Economy, Gareth Lyons, Legislation, Goods, Regulation and Chemicals from the Department of Economy, and Jennifer Stewart, Head of Firearms and Explosives Branch within the Department of Justice, and also Kenise Ward, Head of Medicines Regulatory Group and Department of Health. And I'm going to hand over to yourselves to brief us.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. As you've said, I'm Mark McGregor, Head of Legislation, Goods, Regulation and Chemicals Branch within the Department for the Economy. I'll be taking you through initially our evidence this morning. I'll be giving you an overview of the CLP regime, and Gareth, my colleague, will be giving some more detail on the actual revisions being proposed, and then we'll have some comment from our colleagues in Justice and Health. The EU Regulation 1272/2008 on hazard classification, labelling and packaging of chemicals, substances and mixtures is more commonly referred to as CLP, and we'll refer to it as CLP throughout. It's contained within the Windsor Framework Annex 2. There is presently a proposal for a revision of the CLP regulation, and on the 14th of October the Council agreed to adopt the revision. and agreed with the European Parliament decision. So at the present, we're just waiting for the revision to be formally signed, probably on the margins of the European plenary Parliament session this week. And after that signature and publication in the official journal, the formal notification will take place to yourselves via the JCWG structures, and then implementation of the amendments will begin in mid-2026 across the EU and Northern Ireland if it is adopted and applies here. The CLP revision includes introduction of new hazard classes. The new hazard classes have already been added to CLP by a previous committee delegated regulation 2023-707 that entered into force in April 2023 and already applies to substances and mixtures placed on the Northern Ireland market. So that element came in before the Democratic Scrutiny Committee was established and your scrutiny role was in place. There's a similar regulatory regime applies in Great Britain as assimilated law, so it's essentially mainly a snapshot of the EU CLP regime, and it's known as UK or GB CLP. Just to cover the departmental responsibilities and roles, there's quite a varied spread of things. The main competent authority and policy lead for CLP is the Department for Economy. However, other departments provide technical and scientific support in specific areas. Our colleagues in the Department of Justice hold competence and enforcement responsibilities for civil explosives only. The Health and Safety Executive of Northern Ireland and local authorities or councils carry out enforcement responsibilities. The Department for Health has enforcement responsibilities in relation to CLP in registered premises in Northern Ireland. The Environment Agency provides support for CLP cases that involve environmental hazards. And then it's important to note under an agency agreement between DFE, Department of Justice, and the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain, HSEGB provide advice, scientific and expert advice on CLP. And as subject matter experts on CLP, we tend to have to refer the more technical and scientific queries to them for input. And that is governed under an agency agreement which is published on the HSEGB website. So just a brief overview of the CLP regulation as it stands. Its overall purpose is to ensure a high level of protection of health and the environment while maintaining free movement of substances and mixtures within the EU market. It sets uniform requirement for suppliers to classify, label and package hazardous chemicals appropriately before placing them on the market. Suppliers must assess whether the substances and mixtures they place on the market have harmful properties and classify them by type and level of hazard. The most harmful substances, which are those that can cause cancers, cell mutations or adverse reactions to fertility or respiratory systems, are legally required to apply an EU harmonised classification. The harmonised classification sets labelling requirements for that substance that must apply throughout the EU market to ensure adequate risk management. Suppliers must then clearly communicate the identified hazard to consumers, the supply chain, and the poison centres for the emergency health response. And that's the National Poison Information Service in Birmingham, which was administratively appointed by the departments to receive that emergency health response information. Labelling requirements can include the quantity of the hazardous substance, hazard pictograms, signal words and safety advice. Finally, packaging of substances must be durable, resealable, prevent the escape of substances, and where required, include child-resistant fastenings and tactile warnings. Just a brief overview on the need for the CLP revision before Gareth covers some of the detail. It supports the aims of the European Green Deal, which sets out the EU's ambition for sustainability, carbon neutrality and zero pollution. The European Commission adopted its chemical strategy for sustainability in October 2020. The strategy aims to better protect human health and the environment from harmful chemicals and boost innovation by promoting the use of safer and more sustainable chemicals. As part of that strategy, an evaluation of EU chemicals regimes identified 3 main areas of weakness in CLP. First, certain harmful hazards posed by chemicals are not being classified strongly enough under existing criteria. The Commission expressed concerns in particular for chemicals with endocrine disrupting properties, so it's dealing with your hormone system. These chemicals can impact the environment or human health by causing an over or under production of hormones. The Commission also expressed concern regarding toxic chemicals that accumulate and persist in the environment and living organisms, and mobile and persistent chemicals that can cause long-lasting contamination of water resources. Secondly, hazard communication to both consumers and businesses is suboptimal and is leading to the potential exposure of consumers, workers and the environment to unnecessary risk. Consumers do not fully understand the pictograms and warnings, and label readability is limited due to technical language and small font sizes. Thirdly, there are legal gaps and high levels of non-compliance with CLP. Analysis indicated that imports of substances or substances sold online, marketplaces in particular, were often classified or labelled incorrectly, leading to their incorrect use, storage and disposal, and that accurate hazard information was not submitted to poison centres for the emergency health response requirement.
I'll continue then and look at what the key amendments to CLP actually are going to be. So first of all, to address the concerns around classification, they brought forward 6 new hazard classes. They were added back in 2023, and they deal with hazards such as endocrine disruptors, persistent, accumulative, mobile and toxic properties. And these classes, along with substances that pose any kind of carcinogenic, mutagenic or fertility risk, will also be prioritised going forward for harmonised classification by the EU. The Commission's been given further powers as well in the amendments. They can now mandate that the European Chemicals Agency develop new harmonised classifications going forward. And they've also simplified the assessment process to improve transparency and allow access to SMEs for making assessments of their chemicals. To communicate the hazards better, there have been new formatting rules for labels. This will include minimum font sizes, directions on line spacing, and requirements for all warning text to be printed in black on a white background. The labelling rules also extend to selling chemicals in refillable containers, new exemptions from labelling for chemicals that are sold either in very small packaging or in bulk, such as fuel, and options to use digital labels and fold-out labels on packages. To address the concerns around legal gaps and non-compliance with the rules, there will be new rules brought in to apply the sale of that will apply to the sale of substances via distance sales or online marketplaces. So all advertisements or product listings on online marketplaces must now display clearly hazard text and pictograms that you would typically find on a physical label. All suppliers who place substances on the Northern Irish or EU market must also now be established in the EU or Northern Ireland, or appoint a responsible person in the EU or Northern Ireland again to be responsible for ensuring that the substances meet CLP. The requirement to submit information relevant to poison centres for emergency health response is also now broadened, and this will apply to importers and distributors who relabel and rebrand substances. And these changes will be implemented in 18 months following the adoption of the legislation in force. But there is a further 6-month period for the changes to the label formats, and there's also a 24-month transition period, which will apply to any products currently in sale on store.
At that point, I'll just come back and cover some initial assessment of impact. Although CLP is a devolved matter, as noted previously, the Health and Safety Executive of Great Britain provide expert scientific and technical advice to the Department. Our assessment of impact is therefore informed by the explanatory memorandum provided by HSE in February 2023. That explanatory memorandum is slightly out of date, and we've also provided extracts from an updated but not yet published explanatory memorandum, which HSE GB are working on. On receipt of that full EM, we will be forwarding it to the committee to, in writing for you to examine. DFE have, however, conducted light touch engagement with business. In September, we wrote to 53 businesses that were identified as key players in the market based in Northern Ireland, and 8 trade bodies to request feedback on the changes proposed by the EU to CLP. Unfortunately, at this time, no feedback has been received, and We're still continuing to try and engage in that, but it will be interesting to see the responses that the committee receives, be it citizen-based survey or consultation on this area. HSE have highlighted a number of areas where the amendments to CLP may lead to additional costs for Northern Ireland business and potentially temporarily disrupt supply chains. This includes the need to redesign non-compliant labels and relabel products, updating advertisements and product listings in online marketplaces, training to accurately classify substances within the new hazard classes, training and implementation of risk management measures to comply with new rules for the sale of chemicals at refill stations, the requirement for certain distributors which import chemical products to submit emergency health response information to poison centres, and HSE's initial estimate that the total administrative costs for Northern Ireland-based suppliers would be in the region of £88,000 per annum. We haven't seen the HSE methodology for making that estimate, and it's something that we're going to be following up in writing with them to try and understand that a little fuller. HSE does, however, identify potential cost mitigations. The cost of updating labels and online marketplaces may be mitigated when changes overlap with scheduled rebranding or marketing activities, which typically occur every 18 months. Other amendments, such as digital and fold-out labels, are voluntary, but offer labelling flexibilities and could be used to reduce administrative burdens and lead to savings for Northern Ireland suppliers through avoidance of relabelling costs. Additional derogations for chemicals sold to consumers in bulk, such as fuel and in very small packaging, will also exempt some suppliers from incurring CLP compliance costs. The overall costs of the legislative package to Northern Ireland-based suppliers will be offset by a projected saving of £1.12 million per annum to public health systems and depollution schemes. The benefits stem mainly from the protection of health and the environment. Trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland may be impacted due to the requirement for businesses in the rest of the UK to comply with the amended CLP regulations to supply the Northern Ireland market. The scale and impact of this will depend on whether these businesses also supply the EU market and the position adopted by HSE GB on implementing equivalent changes to the GB CLP regime. HSE are currently assessing the amendments made by the EU to CLP, and this included a public consultation in September on potential changes to GB CLP, including relabelling, labelling formats, warning statements and pictograms. Northern Ireland-based businesses can continue to move qualifying chemical products to Great Britain. That concludes my remarks on the impacts. I'm just going to pass to other departmental colleagues for some brief comment before concluding. Jennifer, would you like to come in?
Well, as Mark has already said, the Department of Justice is designated competent authority and enforcing authority in respect of CLP for explosives for civil uses. We don't anticipate that this will be impacted by the current amendment to CLP. Mark's already said as well that we are signatories to the agency agreement with HSE, who provide technical support as required. We also in DOJ have a memorandum of understanding with the HSE Explosives Inspectorate, so they provide the technical health and safety support to DOJ. And I think
Kenneth?
Folks, as Mark has already alluded to, the Department of Health has monitoring, enforcement and surveillance responsibilities in relation to CLP in registered premises or pharmacies in Northern Ireland. These responsibilities continue under this legislation and there's no change. So generally pharmacies in Northern Ireland and indeed across the UK are entitled to sell certain poisons or chemicals which may be affected by this legislative change. Typically a pharmacy might sell some household chemicals such as caustic soda, hydrogen peroxide or citric acid, etc. in various forms. So when these products are now to be sold in Northern Ireland, they will have to be compliant with this updated legislation. On very, very rare occasions, a pharmacist may order a chemical or a particular chemical to extemporaneously prepare a medicine for a patient at the request of a prescriber. This is very rare, but any chemicals that they order in that manner would now have to be compliant with that updated legislation. Medicines themselves are exempted, specifically exempted from the CLP regulation. The classification, label and packaging of medicines is covered in its entirety by medicines legislation, and there's no impact on that as a result of this CLP legislation. And so this change won't have any impact on the supply of medicines to Northern Ireland. As I said, the department has enforcement and surveillance responsibilities, and that's unchanged by this legislation also. Thank you.
That concludes the introductory evidence from the departments. I hope you found it useful, and we're very happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much to all of you. First of all, apologise to Canis. I give you your French pronunciation of your name. So, in terms of, this committee's role, we look at these things with regard to significant impact on communities that are likely to persist. So you said the HSE has light touch consultation with businesses, so they've sent out to 53 businesses and no response.
That was engagement by ourselves. That was under GAR's control. We engaged with Invest NI to try and identify some key players within the market and relevant trade bodies, and reached out to them. It's an area where there's previously been difficulty in engaging the sector. Last year, in conjunction with DERA, we tried to reach out and engage with the sector, and I think there was 200 businesses contacted at that time, and only 7 responded. Now, obviously, our light touch engagement was just asking for general views on the amendment to get an idea of how they may feel. It wasn't a full consultation by any stretch, and the time to respond was quite limited. But we received no substantive responses into that. But that reflects difficulties that we're experiencing in engaging with the chemical sector.
And in terms of potential additional cost that you mentioned, was that made aware to businesses during this light touch exercise?
No, we just asked for general feedback and comment from businesses on the CLP amendments.
Okay, yeah. Fair enough. And in terms of your own opinion with regard to the impact, I know you've kind of went across the board, but is there going to be a significant impact to communities here in the north that are liable to persist as a result of this new EU legislation?
It would seem unlikely, because any supply chain disruption could potentially be short term, because GB is looking at their chemicals regime. They're going out to consultation. They're considering areas of alignment with the EU. They've currently got the Product Regulation and Metrology Bill going through Parliament that would potentially allow alignment in areas like chemicals regulation. So there is the potential that GB will come in the alignment eventually. But we don't know how long that is going to take. They are reviewing the area, and they're reviewing their chemical strategy in the round, not just the CLP aspect of it.
Thank you. David?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation so far. Just ask, in terms of the businesses covered by this regulation, is there any sense of what that accounts for in terms of the total trade at the moment between GB and NI on that basis?
Yeah, I've got some figures on that. It's hard to give an exact figure, because this will impact companies who manufacture chemicals, companies who blend chemicals together, companies who may use chemicals to offer a service, for example. So it's quite a lot of people are touched by it. Going by the strict definition of a company dealing with chemicals by HMRC, it's approximately 2% of the Northern Ireland industry would work in that kind of area. Okay. So not insignificant. Yeah, would be the answer to that.
Absolutely. And just go back actually to the point you were making in terms of your answer to Chair there, in terms of the engagement you've had with some of those businesses already, and saying that there hasn't been much coming back. And do you think it would be beneficial to share some of your flag some of your concerns, or just your own view of how the impacts, positive or negative, with businesses, to see if they feed back to that? That may not be the usual way of doing things, but I'm just...
We did do that. So the letter I sent out to businesses did kind of go through, if you like, a summary of what we presented today.
Yes, that's what
this is what it's going to bring in, and this is the potential issues it may bring as well. We didn't put figures on it as such because we're not sure how reliable those figures exactly are, but we gave a overview of exactly what it was going to mean for businesses in Northern Ireland, and then asked for feedback on that.
And as well, we're still waiting for guidance from the EU for businesses on how to implement CLP. So obviously it isn't in place quite yet, and then there's a lead-in time of 18 months to 2 years for a lot of the provisions. So it gives time for that guidance to be produced. So we ourselves don't have that kind of technical compliance guidance because the EU hasn't drilled down into that level of detail yet.
Yeah, one other thing on that too, HSEGB have done the consultation back in September. Now, as part of that, they've had a look at it. They did get responses from Northern Irish businesses on that consultation. Okay. So although that's about, GB changes going forward, not EU, it was asking questions around, how much does it cost to change a label, timescales, and those kind of things. So they're going to try and extract that information for us at a local level, and that might be helpful to have,
Yeah, sure. Is there any indications or fears at the moment that there's any risk of GB-based businesses that currently trade into Northern Ireland withdrawing from Northern Ireland if
we've had no direct indication of it. We're aware that it is a risk. Now the assessment would be that the chemicals market is generally global. An awful lot of GB chemicals will be supplied via an EU supply chain, and most companies will also be supplying into the EU. So meeting their compliance there will meet their Northern Ireland compliance. There may be some smaller companies that are only supplying the UK and the GB market that could potentially decide not to comply and continue to distribute in Northern Ireland. But they would be seen to be smaller businesses in smaller areas. We don't have any defined risk in that area, and it's not a case where there wouldn't be alternatives available. There may be another GB supplier who would supply, or an EU-based manufacturer who can supply.
So there isn't a strong risk if any of those businesses pulled out, that would add to significant disruption in supply chains or anything in that nature?
Well, obviously we can't guarantee for every single case, but in most instances we're not anticipating a risk in that area.
Is there any public services that would be disproportionately affected by any disruptions?
Well, yes, there are certain bodies that are heavy users of chemicals. You would see in the energy industry, in energy generators, they'll use certain chemicals in cooling processes and the like. But all those bigger organisations that are buying in bulk, are expected to have a supplier that is already within the EU supply chain and compliant. So we haven't had anybody flagging any risk or concern about a supplier not being continuing supply.
Yeah, we were given a list of companies used by NI Water and the NIE, the generators of electricity, and those main suppliers are multinational companies, so we'd imagine they will be obviously having European operations and would continue to meet the requirements going forward.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Like the others, I think any politician hears there's been no feedback. You worry. So I just wanted to ask, you've answered quite a bit of it already, but just if there are any further plans to try and increase that engagement. And it just is interesting to me, as the Department for Economy, you would have quite a lot of engagement with business ordinarily. So the process for this was through Invest NI, did you say? Are you going to be exploring any other ways of engaging?
Yes, because we've faced the challenges in getting the industry to engage. We're currently in the process of scoping the idea of a chemical stakeholder forum. That's what we're provisionally titling it as. And we're looking at the kind of areas that we might want to engage people in, we're having to discuss with other departments, because DFE are only responsible for 3 chemicals regimes. There's an awful lot more sitting on DERA, and if we were doing something, we would probably do it jointly. So it was demonstrated here where we wanted to understand the views of business and we're unable to obtain them, that we're exploring that. Obviously it will require approvals within the department and ministerial approval, but we are working towards establishing a chemical stakeholder forum to look at these things on a semi-regular basis.
Thank you. Yeah, and if it's been an issue, as you said in the past, that makes sense then.
Yeah, and also the list I put together of local businesses dealing with chemicals was sent to HSE, GB as well. That's why it was compiled initially. They'd actually asked for that because they wanted to contact businesses personally. So HSE are going to...
They'd actually contacted before you had...
No, they haven't contacted them yet. They'd asked for a list of companies,
Okay.
which I got them.
Okay.
I then decided to use that to contact directly through DFE. But HSE have plans for engagement also.
Okay.
With that list of companies.
And because people responded to that consultation, that they should get some.
Hopefully.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks very much for the presentation, gentlemen. Firstly, I suppose in conjunction with Kate's comment, it does concern me that there has been such a historical lack of engagement from the chemicals industry with departments in this nature, particularly given some of the changes. So I suppose probably pivoting back to David's question, which isn't unrelated to that engagement piece. Did you say 2% of all trade is chemical related in Northern Ireland? Did I pick that up right?
Yeah.
You see, we've got a note here that the Northern Ireland chemicals industry generates 222 million GVA, so that's 2% of the UK chemicals industry GVA, and it comprises 0.5% of the total Northern Ireland GVA. So the figure there is 222 million.
Yeah, I can imagine
sorry, go ahead.
Yes, so 2% is the number of employees as part of the Northern Ireland workforce.
So that's quite significant in itself, and the fact being that nobody is replying or engaging via the traditional forms of engagement would lead to a lot of concern from me. I just want to flag that. I know you've suggested means by which you try to address that, but certainly not only in this space, but going forward, and if there is to be persistent changes or updates, I think that's something that we need to bear in mind. So 2%, how many businesses roughly would that be?
I was 85 at that point identified.
Okay, and again, clarifying on David's point, in terms of that trade, what percentage of the trade is suppliers from GB into Northern Ireland of that total 2%?
We don't know that. So the trade statistics we're given exclude GB Northern Ireland trade. Okay, is there any way of us establishing that figure? We have tried. Unsuccessfully so far on a number of areas to find that figure. So we don't believe so. We don't believe that HMRC is providing that data at this time. Well, yeah, well that makes it even more difficult to assess the impact of this, and in particular with, say, for example, if GB does not follow these regulations and there is the risk of divergence there, we could potentially, because we don't know ultimately, I would imagine there's quite I have no more proof than you do, but certainly with some of the people that I engage with in this industry, I would imagine quite a bit is supplied sourced through GB. And if GB does not follow the same regulations, there is the potential for significant divergence if that action of trade is in any way fettered. Would that be a fair assessment?
There is the potential that a GB-based supplier may decide not to comply with the EU regulations and then can't access the Northern Ireland market. Other than recognising that it potentially exists, we have no evidence of, nobody's flagged us that they're in that situation. They're concerned about their supplier. We have had, comment on generally how the chemicals market works and how it is so interconnected at a global and European level that in most cases it's anticipated not to have that impact. But you are correct, there is a risk, particularly of some smaller GB-based suppliers, that they may wish to withdraw from the Northern Ireland market.
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of commentary, indeed, in other sectors about how differential in labelling could cause significant disruption to the Northern Ireland supply chain, and that goes across a number of different sectors and industries. So I suppose probably drilling down, and I know you said the HSC did mention what this would cost in addition. Do we have any specifics on what the increase, in terms of costs in reference to trying to meet these EU requirements for a GB supplier, for example?
We don't, but the consultation done in September by HSC for their plans for the GB version of this, once that's given to us, that'll give us a good indication.
Right. Well, so we have no real ability to identify or delve into the cost per business then for NI or GB businesses complying with the regs. There's no way to dissect that at this stage.
No, the HSC memorandum did give a figure of 88,000 per year for Northern Ireland as a whole. Okay. But
how does that figure come about?
That's what we're looking to find out.
We haven't seen the methodology for that, and it's one that we're interested to work out how HSE GB have got that. So we're waiting a response from that, and we'll share it with the committee once that's received.
Okay, so and again, you guys don't have the answers to this except from what you said, but I would want to know the scale of trade from GB to NI, and therefore how does that impact if there is divergence if GB doesn't follow? I'm not entirely convinced that GB are following in that instance, and certainly I don't see any indication that they are in any time quick, and also the cost per business and how that might impact upon the sector here. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen. And
thank you. So, I mean, just following on for some of the points Jonathan made, I mean, you seem to be suggesting early on that it looks like businesses or that legislation in GB may well follow the EU example, although you don't have a time frame for that. But just given the points that you made with regard to the global nature of the chemical market, it kind of follows that it's likely, regardless of legislation across the water, that businesses who are in a global market who want to trade, whether it's here or anywhere else, will follow EU regulations. Yeah,
for CLP there's a global harmonisation system, and in this instance the EU are a step ahead, so they're pushing ahead with improving their chemicals regulation and increasing the risks that they're trying to protect. GB follows that global system as well. They haven't currently adopted the hazard classes, and that means that the rest of the world hasn't generally adopted those. But the EU is already pushing for them to be added to the agenda, to be potentially adopted on a global basis. And you would quite often see the situation, just because of the nature of the size of the EU market, that globally companies will want to comply with it to maintain access. So the EU is engaging on the global side of things to try and get the additional hazard classes added via the global system, which would then make them applicable to GB and the UK via that route, rather than a alignment with the EU approach. So there are a couple of routes towards GB getting closer to the position in the EU and Northern Ireland. We aren't guaranteed that happens. That's that really will fall down to the Whitehall departments and the UK government.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming forward. There are no more questions. No doubt, I mean, this hasn't been notified yet, so we'll be hearing from you at a later date, no doubt. So thank you very much.
Yes, we would expect that to be within a couple of weeks, because we're expecting signature on the margins of plenary this week, and then the publication and your notification after that.
Good job.
Thank you.
Well, just to remind members, as I've done, we haven't been notified about this in particular, and also on the point about seeking views, just to remind everybody that this committee has also agreed to seek views from stakeholders on the proposed regulations. So we've written out to a number of organisations to seek our own assessment from them. Also, the committee will consider any of those responses then at our meeting scheduled for the 21st of November. So if everybody's content, we're going to write to the British Government to ask it to share its updated explanatory memorandum as soon as possible, and request details of the steps it has taken to mitigate divergence in this area, its engagement with the EU in the proposal through the Windsor framework structures, its discussions through the common framework and engagement with local departments and stakeholders, the views of other devolved administrations and its policy intentions in the area. So we're writing to ask them to kind of cover a lot of the things that we got there. David?
Sure, can I also suggest that we write to, I think it's HMRC, and ask them if they can provide further details of the scale of trade between GB and Northern Ireland, and reinforce that this information is important for the committee to undertake its work.
Okay, everybody content? Okay, so moving then on to item 7, which is proposals for a regulation on packaging and packaging waste. So relevant papers are at pages 217 to 512 of the meeting pack. The committee has not yet been notified of this proposed EU Act, but at our meeting on the 12th of September it was again identified as a priority during the forward work planning exercise. The European Parliament and Council of the EU provisionally agreed the text for this proposal in March of this year. The text is undergoing a legal and linguistic review and is expected to be formally adopted by the Parliament and Council before the end of the year. So the committee requested a departmental assessment of impact, and that can be found at pages 493 to 497 of the meeting pack. Legal advice as well, and that can be found at pages 498 to 508. If members are content, once the text has been formally adopted by the Council and Parliament, that DERA be asked to submit an updated assessment of impact, and an evidence session is scheduled with departmental officials. That legal advice on the final draft text is commissioned, and a legal advisor is asked to attend a closed session of this committee. That the British government is asked to share an updated explanatory memorandum as soon as possible, including an updated assessment of the draft final text, and also that the views of stakeholders identified by RAISE are sought via citizen space with a 4-week deadline for response. All content? Okay, thank you. Item 8, proposals for a regulation on plant health reporting requirements. So this item is dealt with at pages 513 to 602 of our meeting pack. The committee again has not yet been notified of this proposed EU Act, but at our meeting on 12th September again identified this as a priority in our forward planning exercise. So this proposal is completing its final steps in the EU legislative process. The European Parliament formally approved the text on October 24, and it must now be approved by the Council of the EU. The agreed text will then be published in the EU official journal, and then a notification isn't expected in the very near future. However, the Secretariat team is monitoring developments. If everybody's content, we're going to write to the British Government to request an updated EM on the final text, and that be shared with the committee as soon as possible. And also, if they're content, for the Secretariat team to inform legal services and RAISE of our committee's interest in the proposed replacement EU Act. Okay, thank you. So, yes, Jonathan?
And just in particular, clarity on how the regulation will affect business to consumers. I know there was emphasis in some of the papers about business to business being unaffected, given some of the arrangements within Windsor Framework, but it doesn't really specify how it's going to impact upon business to consumer. So some clarity around that whenever there's an explanatory memorandum.
Yep, we can include that. Okay, item number 9, our work planning. So can I refer everybody to the table at pages 603 to 605 of our meeting pack, and this table outlines the actions agreed by the committee on 12th of September following our forward work planning process. It provides an update on progress in relation to each of the proposed or published EU Act identified, and some of them we've actually dealt with today. Are members content to note the update? Thank you. Number 10 then on our agenda, correspondence. 10.1, pages 607 to 609, is a response from Nick Thomas Simmons on information sharing arrangements. So the Minister states that the British Government will continue to provide this committee with information and analysis on relevant proposed and adopted EU Acts, as has been the case throughout the year. Members content to note his response? 10.2, pages 610 to 612, is a quarterly status update from RAISE on an EU proposal which the committee is monitoring. This refers to field inspections and seed production in Moldova and Ukraine. Proposal is currently awaiting committee decision in the European Parliament, and it is confirmed that no significant changes have been made to the proposal to date. Everybody content to note? 10.3, at pages 613 to 618, British Government has shared an updated EM on regulation on the digital labelling of EU fertilising products. As you will recall, at our meeting on 10th of October, the committee agreed not to conduct an inquiry into this regulation. Are members content that the updated EM is published on the committee's web pages? Okay, thank you. 10.4, which covers pages 619 to 620, as a response from the British Cabinet Office in relation to the committee's request for an update on the EU deforestation regulation. So, since our letter, the European Commission has proposed to delay the implementation of the deforestation regulation by 12 months to 30th of December 2025. So, there is still some uncertainty around whether all or only some parts of the regulation apply under Article 13.3, and if some are only which fall within the scope of 13.4. So, difference between applicability or inquiry. On that basis, are members content to write to the British Government to seek clarity? David?
Sure, yes, and could we make that inquiry quarterly until such time as it comes forward?
Yep. If everybody's happy with that, no issues. Okay, 10.5 at pages 2621 to 622 is a response from the Cabinet Office of the Committee's request for an update in relation to the EU carbon border adjustment mechanism. So the last substantial correspondence the committee had sight of was between the Lord Scrutiny Committee and the relevant minister at that time. The minister said that the European Commission had not confirmed its intentions with respect of the EU CBAM, and the British government hadn't received any formal notification in relation to this, and also said that any scenario in which the EU CBAM applies here remains hypothetical. More recently, the new British government's industry minister said that the government is looking at what the EU is doing on the carbon border, and it is understood that ministers are working with the EU on ways to align carbon taxes. So, in effect, no change and no update. Are members content to note the response? Okay. My throat's going dry here. 10.6, pages 623 to 648 is an update from the Chairperson's Liaisons Group on post-legislative scrutiny and strengthening committee scrutiny. Everybody content to note? Mm-hmm. Yep. So, item 11, Chair's business. Just to let everybody know, yesterday the British House of Lords Liaison Committee recommended to the House of Lords the creation of a new scrutiny committee for the North. A new committee, which would be reviewed after 2 years at the end of 2026, would complement the work of this committee and the House of Commons NI Affairs Committee. The committee's remit would be similar to that of the former Windsor Framework Subcommittee, which scrutinised EU legislation within the scope of the Windsor Framework, as well as other legislation relating to here. So the subcommittee also conducted inquiries on related matters. We received lots of notification and engagement from. So the report on the recommendation will now go to the House of Lords for approval, and members will be kept informed of progress. And a link to that report will be circulated to members following the meeting. So that's information in its own right, but it also has a knock-on effect for what the committee had tended to do with regard to our Westminster visit. In light of this development, we're suggesting the visit be rescheduled for early 2025 to allow engagement with the new committee, and the Secretariat team will come back to us with proposals for dates once that committee has been established. Yeah. Happy?
Yeah, content.
Okay, makes sense. Item number 12, any other business? None? Just see Emma's thumbs up there. I don't know. Down now. Okay. Item number 13, date, time, place of next meeting. So notifications are paused today, so the committee doesn't need to meet over the Halloween recess. Therefore, the next committee meeting has been scheduled for Thursday, 7th of November 2024 at a later time of 11 a.m. in room 30. committee's visit to Brussels begins on the 4th of November, so those members on the visit will attend remotely. Everybody content? Okay, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound.